thank you, Russell, for a reminder that there is a Q&A following the next session. So please have your questions ready. You'll have the opportunity to ask our four speakers this morning some pertinent questions. Our next speaker is David Fox. David speaks to us today as someone who has commenced his career in the machining trade through a vocational pathway, and like many has undertaken further study to complete a bachelor's degree and a master's by research. His career has taken him from the trades to engineering design, projects, operational management and onto leadership. Late in 2021, David had a career pivot which has seen him move into the New South Wales Government, working on delivery of the new Advanced Manufacturing Research Facility being built in Western Sydney, a position that allows him to connect his enthusiasm for manufacturing and his interest in STEM education. David is currently Associate Director of Research and Technology at the Western Sydney Parkland City Authority and is helping lead the development of the Advanced Manufacturing Research Facility by engaging with manufacturers, educators and academics to help shape an advanced manufacturing ecosystem for the Western Parkland City. Please welcome David Fox.
Okay, great to be here, and I guess I have a bit of a mixed story, and there's a couple of people in the room I recognise, but not many, and I think that's the great thing, is getting out to new networks and connecting with new people. My interest in, I guess, skills and vocational training particularly obviously stems from a background in that, but more importantly, as I got involved in manufacturing and the digital over the top, I started to engage a lot with schools, and sort of through the period of probably 15 to 19, I did quite a bit of work and took technology to schools, and that really got me interested in this field. And so I'm really glad, after a bit of a break for various reasons, really glad to be back in the room. So I'll work my way through this, and I guess being someone who spent 35 years in manufacturing and trying to go over to government, it's a bit of a round hole square peg thing. So I'm still trying to work out how I kind of formalities with the government. So my presentation's kind of, I guess, a bit formal in that sense. I was just trying to tick those boxes, but I might just wander off and talk about the things that really matter to me as we go through. And if I don't get through it all, it probably doesn't really matter because it's available to have a look at. So I just kind of ran through a couple of sections, really just setting a context, talk about a bit about how I got here, the student engagement channels, the manufacturing skills, and then a bit of a concluding statement around what I think we do moving forward. So I guess first of all is around that manufacturing ecosystem, and this is a really big complex problem, and what does it involve? So on the left-hand side there, I kind of looked at what are the different areas that kind of feed into it, so the customers, the services, etc., the infrastructure, the technologies, equipment, talent, educators, knowledge and funding, of course. But if you kind of simplify that, really I think it comes down to a couple of main things, being that investment attraction opportunity, and that's both in the private and the government, and, what's happening to kind of move things forward, move the dial forward. The technology access, so getting access to those technologies, and then the social political lens I think is one I'm really passionate about. And it's kind of been touched on a bit today with I think Brian talking about the story and getting that message out there. That's something I very much noticed being in traditional manufacturing, is just not even getting young people through the door, let alone being able to have those conversations. So that message out there and this lens that was put over manufacturing sort of back in the mid-80s and kind of went right through until very recently has done a lot of damage in terms of a whole generation, not in the industry. And it's a major problem just to get the conversation to happen, let alone to the processes to kind of guide them through that. And the last one, of course, is the education system. And I guess that's why we're all here today, particularly. And I'm really glad to see VET kind of taking some strength and moving forward again. So just first of all, I'll go through the government thing, I guess, and talk about the Western Parkland City Authority, not to be confused with the Western Parkland City, I think it is, which does just parks. We do the economic development in the Western Parkland region, so running from the Hawkesbury down, so I'll talk about it a bit more in a minute. It's kind of tasked with this job, with this task of creating, I guess, the developments through Western Sydney, and really kind of working towards how do we get this region to have better jobs in that area that are pay well, so people aren't moving to the east as much for their work. getting the collaborative outcomes between different stakeholders in that area and getting some equality around jobs, so making Western Sydney, I guess, a great place to work as we move forward. There's a whole lot of things within the authority, and I only do a very small part of that. And that's something that I struggle in still to get used to, the size of the project in terms of putting all this infrastructure in, building a new city, those sorts of things. For someone who spent all their life in small business with, relatively small problems, this is a really complex problem and really big. So still getting my head around how do you engage with that as we move forward. So just to kind of run through what is the Western Parkland City they talk about. So it's that orange region you can see on the left there that runs from up in the north right down south. And if I generalise around what are the capabilities that they're trying to put through this region, up in the north is the ag sector and the ag tech type technologies. Obviously there's lots of infrastructure up there already and lots of education institutions that deliver in that space up the Hawkesbury way. In the middle is really hubbed around that advanced manufacturing technology innovation. And then down south is more focused on medical and medtech and those sorts of things. So that's kind of what they're trying to do with that. I think the interesting thing with the Western Parkland City Authority is it's kind of has this job between federal government and state governments to kind of coordinate effort. So it's been really good to see that sort of happening, I guess, both as a resident and someone who grew up in the area and also now working in that space. It's good to see. So the purpose of all this is to support existing industries in terms of the manufacturing and build capability and then attract new industries and jobs. So the Western Parkland City has this role of attracting big international industries into the area to help create some stakeholder placement around jobs and opportunities, which will then stem out into other jobs. So we'll just, not too far, yeah, that's the one I want. So just quickly from a geography point of view, for those that don't know, many would, but yeah, the Bradfield City, which is the main project around that, we're building a new city like a Canberra, I guess, but a bit smaller, around 100 hectares they've got just below the airport to put in a new city. So there's around $20 billion investment that's across all sorts of things, private, government, etc., to kind of get this up and running. The Western Parkland's doing a lot of the infrastructure, so the metro rail that's going in from St Mary's down to Bradfield and putting in the roads and all the services that go with that, the power, etc., because it is a greenfield site, and integrating that up with the airport. And the airport was seen as a catalyst for kind of revitalising this area or starting with something new. And so, yeah, so our focus in terms of mine is on Bradfield City Centre itself. And that first build, or the advanced manufacturing research facility that sits in that city. So just to give you a bit of a feel about what does the city look like. So it sits sort of just south of the airport, as you can see there, has kind of 4 quadrants made up into it. So the first part, the blue there, is around that national security, so particularly going to be focused on space and defence type technologies. The middle part, the yellow one, is our education innovation, as it says, and that's where the CSIRO will be now based once it's going. Their buildings are going up now. The Advanced Manufacturing Research Facility will be there, and the metro comes in, and then we're attracting other people into it, so maybe universities or TAFEs or schools and other sort of education institutions, but it's really about creating an education space to do innovation that's alongside some high-tech industries. And because it's not a business park, it's actually meant to be a city that runs 24 hours. It has a leisure and lifestyle quarter and it has a neighbourhood quarter as well. So it's a fairly big undertaking. Just the AMRF itself is around a $260 million project. So it's a huge commitment by the state government to kind of turn the dial on this and move it forward. So just very quickly, what is it about? So the AMRF has 2 stages. So it was done for that reason, because just to get a big advanced manufacturing research facility set up, it would take a long time, and we really wanted to get something on the ground a bit earlier. So they broke it into 2 stages. The first stage is around supporting existing industries, and really what you'd call the mechanical type manufacturing. So around sort of composite materials, additive materials, high-end subtractive, automation, robotics, those sorts of things, sort of hard things that we're kind of all used to seeing, but are really advancing. The second facility is, equally exciting, particularly for the region. It's around creating microelectronics manufacturing. So that means actually building integrated chips that go on printed circuit boards. So bringing in silicon wafers. So we're not a foundry in terms of creating the front end of silicon chips, but it's the back end of it, the packaging, the assembly and the design, and then putting that on printed circuit boards. So the facility is being set up to, I guess, be a place where businesses can come and sit in that facility and prove out their production processes, or create small batches of electronics. So when you think about that in terms of what does that mean for Western Sydney and the jobs even in Sydney around those sorts of manufacturing capabilities? It's quite mind-blowing for someone who's spent a life in a very different area of manufacturing to see that sort of, I guess, skills and knowledge coming into it. And so what does that mean for education too, about how do we move forward when the reality is it's going to be in our backyard, and this is meant to start other businesses up in doing that too. And with the sovereign capability statements that have kind of emerged through out of COVID, that's becoming particularly important for like defence and space. So there's a very likelihood that it'll be beyond this facility, and people will use this as a leaping board, a springboard into creating their own businesses. So you can see probably why someone who spent 30 odd years in manufacturing got interested in this project when I heard it on the radar and thought, oh, that's where I need to be. I was really concentrating on, how do I get in there and how do I make a difference so it really does connect with industry and with educators, and we can use this facility to kind of move this thing forward in terms of an ecosystem. So a little bit about me, I guess, which has already been touched on. So yes, I did start as a 16-year-old in a factory. I came from the Blue Mountains, and I remember coming down to Sydney at the age of 16 and working in Leichhardt in a factory that was there, and that was quite an alarming experience. Being fairly isolated, I guess, up in the mountains in the 80s, coming to the city was something else. But I mean, I guess for me it was doing something that I really could get my hands on and can learn while I was doing, and that was the difference for me. So for me it was just from the moment I started and I got out of school, I just enjoyed what I did, which is why I continued to do these things. And so I did a certificate in mechanical engineering. That was because I only went to year 10, so then I couldn't. But I wasn't really trying to get to university. It was just a natural progression. I just enjoyed what I did. And I think one of the things that was kind of a point for me was in my first exam out of school at TAFE. I did the usual, I just didn't really try because I thought I couldn't really do anything because I never succeeded at school in any sort of way. And I basically left school without being able to read or write and do very little maths. And I did my first exam and I did extraordinarily well. I got something like 80%. I thought, well, that's ridiculous. Like, imagine if I tried. And from that point on, I always have. But that was the difference, is I was doing something I really enjoyed and I loved it. And it was a natural progression to continue to learn. And so, yes, I did the certificate and then I did a diploma because I enjoyed it, not because I thought that was a stepping stone to university. My teacher at TAFE said, hang on a minute, you've done your diploma, you can actually go to university if you want. I thought, wow, imagine that, if I could go to university. So I did. And I did 8 years part-time at UTS, doing engineering degree. And then I had a year off, and I went a little bit crazy with the year off because I wasn't studying at night. So then I went back and did a research degree, a Masters by Research on project management and small business. So the middle photo, I guess, is kind of the eclipse of that. It was the last probably project I did. That's basically like a barbecue gas bottle you see behind us all, and that was the team I led. We built that thing in about 8 months, from design to delivery down in Melbourne. And for me, that was kind of, I guess, a bit of a pinnacle in my career around the doing side of it. But in doing that, I really got involved in working with people and making things happen. And that kind of pivoted me towards management. And so, I stand today in the last photo, and this is in 6PSQ, where we were based just until recently before we moved to Penrith, back in early May. One of the guy on the left there is Ben Kitcher. He's heading up the project for the AMRF. He's come out of the AMRC, so he's an engineer and a manufacturing engineer and spent a lot of time in high-end CNC equipment, not stuff I did. But yeah, just really great to be around someone like that. And the guy on the other side, on the right, Steve, he's out of a small business in Western Sydney, but actually came from SpaceX. So there's a lot of experience in additive manufacturing. So to be standing there with those two guys is just amazing. Like, yeah, to think where I started and what happened. And it really came about from vocational training. And I guess the last point on that slide is that, I did a technology diploma recently because all my training had been around mechanical and those sorts of things. And as digital swept over the top of these very traditional manufacturing, this heavy fabrication, I realised that I need to know a lot more around digital and the skills. So I went and did a diploma in that. So I was back to vocational training. And so that's the importance, I think, of vocational training. It always is there to help you move yourself forward incrementally. And that's been fundamental in the job I'm in now because it gave me a better understanding around the information communication technologies. So we'll get on with just some student engagement stuff now. So I'll talk about a little bit about some of the how manufacturing is changing and why it's a really interesting space to move into the vocational space. I think it has a really good way of helping to deliver skills in a tangible way. So I guess the first thing, the demographic with manufacturing is typically it's a small to medium business environment. There are some big businesses, but typically small. So there's lots of people out there that are really passionate about it, but busy people. So engagement is probably challenging, but there are lots of people that are genuinely want to help in this space and want to offer. So there it is there, and they're usually family owned and run. So they're very personal. It's not corporate. And the other thing is that, the industry is really transforming. And so those two pictures on the top there, that's the same workshop where I was working for a long time. And the first picture's mid-90s, second picture's mid-2000s. So you can already see a change coming through, and it's just changed that much more again. So they're not quite the dirty, dangerous factories that they were when I was in them. They are evolving quite a lot. And I guess the pictures along the bottom are just some of the examples of what's around. Two of those companies, the first one on the left is out at Wetherill Park. They do air conditioning ducting, so Barangaroo, all that sort of stuff, commercial air conditioning ducting. They're an incredibly clean, lean facility. He runs his whole workshop from one number on a screen that everyone understands. He's completely digitised the business. And this is a guy that did a sheet metal trade, and he's created a $100 million business by doing that. It's a remarkable story. The second picture there is around Quickstep. They're in Malpera. They're doing composites for aerospace. So they've worked on the Joint Strike Fighter and other things. So really interesting techs in our own backyard and being applied. And the last picture represents a pharmaceutical company, and that's a completely different spectrum of manufacturing. But I guess from the picture on the left at the top to the one on the right at the bottom gives you a contrast of what manufacturing is. It can be pretty much anything, and it does underpin many, many, many industries that were spoken about before. So I'd like to just talk about STEM and STEAM. For me, I was always about STEM, I suppose, because as an engineer, etc., etc. But one thing really changed me at some point around 2015, 2016, when I came across this article. And I talked about, this is the Crown of Thorns, the Ranger bot that was developed up in Queensland to deal with the Crown of Thorns starfish. And in the article about this, it was an engineering journal. In the article about this, it talked about the design of this product, and of course it had lots of science and engineering and techie stuff in it. But one of the main lines in it was the fact that one of the objectives was that anyone could pick this device up and use it within 15 minutes and get it to work. So the user experience and the user interface and the customer experience side of this design was hugely important. And that's a whole new thread of skills that are emerging. And as you take technology and you apply it to things like that big barbecue gas bottle you saw in the other photo, and it becomes digitised, then people have to interact with that product. So the interaction means that there is this need to understand how people think. So there's a whole nother level of jobs. And so after this, I read this article, I rushed out and found someone in the UX space to work with for a little while, as we started to look at how do we develop procedures in our organisation and how do we digitise those so anyone from the 80-year-old boilermaker I had in my factory to the 16-year-old apprentice could engage with our procedures and processes on a mobile phone. But it took someone like a user experience designer to do that. So that really started to open my eyes about the bandwidth of opportunities across this sector in terms of what does it mean for jobs. So I thought that was a really neat example, and it stuck in my mind forever. I think the other thing that kind of did that was, just back to your point, Brian, was when I was at university, I remember doing mathematics, and one of the things we had to do was we had to look at Mozart from a mathematical point of view and a frequency. And that stuck in my mind too. I thought that was fascinating, absolutely fascinating. I had a very different view of music since then. So if I just talk about student engagement, and the scope I think sits in the how. So if you look at this, is a couple of examples around Sydney. So CST Composites, they do a lot of masts and things for high-speed yachts and things like that. So all out of composites. They also do the tubes for Dyson vacuum cleaners, things like that. So yeah, really advanced. And they're now bought a business in the States and doing hydrogen pressure vessels. So the blue bottle, so Oculus there, they built those autonomous sailing boats for defence, all in Sydney. Omni Tanker, they're out at Smeaton Grange. They do composite tanks for road tankers and have export to the US. And now they're working with Lockheed Martin to do tanks for rockets to go to space. So amazing technology. And Hacko watches the other end of the spectrum, very small. They're a niche little business in North Sydney that actually still design and make watches and doing amazingly well. And their tech, doing such a small scale, have got themselves into space as well for the requirements. So I think the scope of engagement with vocational services is really around those materials and the sciences that sit in those things and understanding what's going on. And I think, in terms of just general education, being able to tangibly connect those to things that are actually going on in the real world is a really interesting concept, and something that I guess when I was doing my engagement with schools kind of drove me, because it was really interesting to connect those things for students. So design problems is obviously another one, and then the production. So there's a whole bunch of things. I'm not going to go through all them, but you get the idea. There is a lot of things if you start to break this down. So I'll keep moving along because I don't want to run out of time. Yep. So I'll just talk a little bit about my engagement. So as I said, from about 16 to 2019, I did a bit of engagement with schools, and Rhonda's quite familiar with this in the back there. I had some internships set up with Liverpool Boys High, particularly because they had a really flexible education model that enabled that. But what I guess the things that really stood out for me is, I stood in my office after I kind of discovered the opportunities with technology, looking out the window thinking, how does a business connect with schools? And it wasn't until I actually connected with some that were really interested that they were having the same sort of problem. Looking out of the principals when they go, how do you connect with industry? And so we came together with Liverpool Boys and did some really, really interesting stuff and had some really interesting projects, long-term internships that took students sort of through a lot of mathematics and data science, all sorts of things we did. And I was just using the innovation we were doing at a heavy fabrication and a manufacturing facility. So while that didn't really attract the students from that point of view, what did attract them was the fact that we were doing things with digital and user experience design and those sorts of things. And that was the vehicle that I used. Our innovation was the vehicle that was really good. So we also partnered with other companies like Lincoln Electric and took out the virtual reality welding, which was touched on earlier. That was really good and really interesting to see. And we had a day at Liverpool Girls. And the engagement was really interesting, and just the different use of that technology in their context was amazing. And then that kind of spread, and then I ended up getting phone calls off students to come in and do stuff with us. So it actually created a bit of a pipeline. It was pretty exciting to see happen. It was exhausting in terms of keeping up with what was going on and trying to run a business. But it was really fun. And it really, I guess, showed me that, hey, manufacturing does have something here to offer. How do we do it all and get it connected? It's a little bit challenging. I got derailed quite slightly through the 2022 period. And then I changed jobs. But moving back to the RMRF, it's a place that we want to be able to do that at some point. So I'll come to that in a minute. But I think the lessons that I took out of the engagement I did over those years was the connecting theory with reality. And for the business itself, it was their unshackled ideas. Like, the students just come up with crazy ideas about how to do things, how to prototype things, and using a gaming engine to kind of gamify integrity records that we were looking at when we were doing the procedure development and digitising that. And they were just playing with stuff that I'd never heard of. So I'd spend time with them, and then I'd run outside and Google all the stuff they just talked about to figure out what it meant. But it was really exciting to be in that space. And then I think for students, getting some experience around how do you kind of bring new tech into a business. That was good for them, just to be able to see and how do we differently engage and what are the challenges, and things didn't work out sometimes and why they didn't work out. It gave them a bit of a sense of reality. And I guess overall it was awareness, confidence and connection. I remember the student up in the top left there, we'd thrown some aeroplanes around the room and we were just doing some really light maths around the airflow over wings. Anyway, so he didn't really get it. But that's okay. He was sent in to work with us because he wasn't really engaged. He was really struggling at school. When he went back to school after, I think he had 3 months with us roughly, and I took him to UTS and a few other places like that and a few other engineering shops. One of the comments from the teacher was that he just had confidence to try other things. That was what he got out of it, confidence. And he felt like he knew a bit more than others. He was pretty happy with that. And for me, that was a great result. Yeah. So that's kind of what I learned out of that experience, and many other things, but I haven't got time to talk about those. So moving on to the next one. So let's just talk about advanced manufacturing. So what is it? It's a big thing, lots of different definitions. You can go crazy on trying to figure it out, but really it's about how it's made, not what it's made. So as you saw in that picture back there with the big barbecue gas bottle, not a really high-tech product, pretty dirty and ugly, but how you make it is what matters, and all the things in it. So that's probably the big takeaway I would take away from advanced manufacturing when someone asks. Just remember that, how it's made. And there's lots and lots of great opportunities for vocational training and formal training in that space. So the technology and skills, this was, I was trying to put together how do I describe this, and it was really hard, and so this is the best I could do. And it's pretty lame, but anyway, we'll work through it. So from a technology point of view, there's lots of different models, just as there is for advanced manufacturing. You can be 7 pillars, 6 pillars, 9 pillars, there's all sorts of versions. So I took this 11 pillar one because I thought, well, it covers lots of things that kind of are interesting. And in terms of Expected skills, well, you know, the one on the left there is pretty common with all businesses. Digital literacy is probably the one that there's a bit of a difference between what you get in students and what you expect. And I think I would sum that up in terms of students know how to use technology usually, but not really apply technology. That's probably the way I'd put it. So you're great at using apps and stuff, but how do you actually get it to do something really cool? So that's kind of there. In terms of the emerging skills, yes, even in manufacturing where you're making big gas bottles, you know, material science, data science, cloud architecture, and that's kind of where I had to pivot my training in terms of going and doing more digital, just to understand what is the architecture behind, how do you set up a business and how do you run a business, how do you stream data and do analytics on it. So the comms and programming around that, the user design and the business model design, because connected products creates a totally new business model for manufacturing that it never had before. And so that's a whole area that's kind of really needs lots of skills and lots of capability in. And customer centricity is the other one. Previously in manufacturing, you would just make something and send it to your customer and don't worry about it anymore. But thinking about and supporting the customer as they do in retail and things like that really, really matters in manufacturing even now. And so in terms of the technologies, there's a whole lot of them there, but I think the standout ones are probably around, as been talked about before, artificial intelligence, the industrial Internet of Things, so the connection of products, and the integration or the interoperability of systems is probably the big one. So systems talking to systems is the big one. So you can have your management software and then it can talk to something on the workshop floor and then you can stream the data to your mobile phone. Those sorts of technologies is where it's getting really exciting. And they're going to be like the expected skills, is to be able to stream data and to manage data in that way. So I think they're the areas that really matter. And probably understanding cloud architecture. And that's, you know, for someone who kind of went to school before computers, got introduced to computers in a fairly sort of low innovative environment, you know, the cloud kind of blew my mind about how it worked. So I had spent so much time trying to understand what does that really mean for a business and what opportunities are there. And I think that's a big one that, you know, schools can probably help with in terms of grabbing, because there's lots of free information and lots of great little short courses and things, building into curriculum the basic understanding. So if I think about, you know, in the 90s, lots of people learned Excel. We went from nothing to that, and we all picked it up great, or many of us picked it up great to some degree. So I think cloud's like that now. We've really got to have that basic understanding of that one. That's a big one. So I will keep going because I haven't got very long. Anyway, you can talk to me later. I'm here all day because I really believe in this. So I'm happy to have conversations and connect with me and I want to be part of this conversation going forward. Role diversity and future of work. Been covered a little bit before, but, you know, and again, trying to think about how do I explain this, didn't do a very good job. But really the roles, and if you just think about a manufacturing business, it's always focused on the production, I guess. You know, everything's manufacturing, production. Well, that's only a small part of it. There's lots and lots of jobs. So obviously management leadership, commercials, law and finance are a big one in that space because of the risks of what you're doing and what you're making. Marketing, sales, communication becoming more and more and more important. So, you know, we talked about before about AI disrupting the marketing and sales sector. It's a really important one for business because you've got to create brand and you've got to have an image, you've got to have these things, and the only way to do that is to get on that bandwagon. And so manufacturers are actually doing it. There's lots of jobs emerging in that space. Project engineering, and it's common. That sort of stuff. Design and simulations. The simulation's a really interesting one as you start to move to not having to do the physical but just to simulate and then do the physical. That's another area I think is going to emerge and change. Materials and supply chain, logistics, all those other businesses that sit behind that. Products, processes and compliance. Compliance is a big one and digitisation around that is really going to support that. So in terms of, we spoke about procedures and things before and automating those, that's a really important area I think in this sector. So, you know, getting understanding and skills in those areas is going to be really important going forward. And then, of course, digital systems and computer science are big ones in that space. And as I said, you know, the diversity of jobs is not just about the production of it, it's the research, it's the coding, it's all the other things that happen in there. So it's a really diverse field when you start to think about it. And to be honest, you know, I spent probably 33 years before I started thinking about, hey, there's lots more jobs in manufacturing than just making stuff. And so it took me a long time to learn, so I don't expect people are going to pick that up quickly. But yeah, there are lots of jobs there if you talk to the right people and get involved. So in just concluding, so I guess the talent pipeline. So how do I describe that? I was struggling to think about, well, how do you get the funnel down into it? And I think the thing is that industry requires a bit of broad thinking and competencies through a number of things. And awareness of the opportunities is really important. So from a careers point of view, like just being aware of what's out there, the wool classing thing is fantastic. I've got a daughter who's trying to get into agriculture. It's doing our heads in. How do we get into agriculture from the city? But yeah, wool classing is one that's already come up, interestingly enough. So awareness, and that's really, really important. I think, yeah, at a school level, giving great awareness about what these jobs are really like, what are these industries really like, not just what the headline is really, really important. And I think that's a collective problem for everyone. Industry owns that as much as the schools do and everything else. And that's getting back to, I guess, industry and their brand. That's part of their brand and part of their story. They need to be telling that story much better than they do. So a grounded application of the theory and the technology, so, giving it some definite grounding, so there's a way of bringing it together. I think the hands-on and the craft skills are really important, so that be it the craft in terms of the picture of the chisel there and the actual craft, or the collaborative craft, the craft of working together. I think those things are really important, and so there's lots that digital can do in the virtual training and all sorts of things, but that stuff is about people to people, and that's still what business is about, people to people. So I think giving opportunities to make that happen. So you do a business model design session or something like that, and you kind of have a bit of fun and work together and come up. It's really good. Even people like me who are introverts and you typically don't like that sort of stuff, find it just really appealing when you get in the right room with the right people. You can actually contribute. It's really fun. Digital knowledge, definitely from the edge to the cloud. It's got to be there. That's going to be the thing. And so basic skills and a basic awareness in that. So think about us in the 90s with Excel. This is what the next generation has to be like with the cloud. It's got to know it, how it works, how it comes together. And confidence in their field of choice, I think, is the other one, just having some confidence and a belief that they can do it. And that needs to probably be bedded in school, I think, is really important. Even if they pivot later, it doesn't matter. But it's just building some confidence that you can do something and you can get good at something or you can believe in something. So, just closing, and I think I'm, about time. So the OMRF, back to that. And, I joined this project because I really, really believe this is going to make a difference. I've never seen, in all the years I've been in manufacturing, the government, state government, commit to manufacturing in this way. And it's at the right time. There's been a social change, there's been a geopolitical change, and there's a technology change. So the timing is perfect for this project. And so from a centre itself, of course, it has a business remit that went up to Treasury and did all the things it needs to do for government in terms of, it's connecting Western Sydney and New South Wales manufacturers to world-class technologies and opportunities, which it will be able to do. Engaging with industries is a challenge we have to work through as a government organisation. We have to pivot ourselves to almost be like a start-up and a small business and get out there and create a pipeline of business and those sorts of things. But if we can get the industry on board, that technology application filters into industry, that creates the jobs and the skills and the things we're all looking for. So it is a great vehicle for that. There's lots of work to do. It isn't just going to happen if we build it, but we have to work together to do that. And I think the other thing is it's purpose-built to enable a community connection. So it's not your typical looking factory. It's got glass walls. It's a big, fancy place. Has a big manufacturing hall. There's a lot of fancy gear in it. It'll be filled with skilled people. It's funded to staff about 30 people to run the facility. So it gives us a licence to really make this connect with the community and bring people into it to understand it. And as soon as I saw this project, I remember I was at a presentation 2.5 years ago or something about this project coming online. I thought, imagine if you could get into that place and you could connect it with schools and you have schools coming through and you have programs set up. It would be amazing. And as I've got into that project and talking to the executive director that's leading it, that's what he wants to happen. One of our remits is that. So my job is to connect with people like yourselves and make that happen. So I really want to see this investment be used and have your input to help us. How do we develop programs? How do we get people to connect with this? Because this is first time ever a physical place that people can see and experience technology in a context where it goes out into the industry. And because it's not a university and it's not a business, it's the goal of it is economic outcome, and that contributes to the economic outcome. So we haven't got to hit the usual things we've got to hit with a business or a university, a revenue stream as such. We have got to generate our own revenue stream to pay for itself, but it doesn't have to generate a profit. So it's a great, great opportunity for everyone. So I really hope that everyone does get on board with this and reaches out to the WPCA and myself particularly to talk about what we can do and how do we do it. So that's it. Thank you very much.